Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. Simplify life with diabetes. By the only ultra-rapid-acting inhaled insulin, and by Dexcom, keeping you in control with an integrated system for diabetes management.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Hello and welcome to another week of the show. This is going to be a very different week. I am your host, as always, though, Stacey Sims. We aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. And I say this is a very different episode because this is episode 500 of Diabetes Connections. I know, right? Where does the time go? I started the show back in June of 2015. Here we are more than 7 years later. Thank you all so much for being here. For the new folks that have found us more recently, this year has seen a real explosion in listeners. It's been awesome. So as I said, this will be a very different episode because I'm being interviewed. Big thanks to, I'll call her the host of this episode, to Cristina Frank. She is a fabulous friend and a friend of the show and a news anchor at WMTW in Maine, and she lives with type 1. We did this live on social media, so there are some references to video, mostly me complaining about the terrible lighting that I have, because I'm also recording this part of the show away. I am not in my home studio. I'm very fortunate to be able to be on vacation and do this kind of stuff, but I get a little tetchy when I'm not at home with my things. Cristina did a great job, and thank you to those of you who sent questions in. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you all. There is no show without you. And I hope I keep delivering what you would like to hear. And all kidding aside, please keep the messages coming in. Let me know what topics, guests, what you want to hear about. This really is a show about you. And we're going to get back to the technology heavy and research heavy stuff in a week or two. But thanks for this indulgence. This was a lot of fun. So here we go. Episode 500 of Diabetes Connections. Everybody, welcome to something very different. I am really excited to be on social media live today, and I'm not alone, and I'm not even hosting this episode. So let me jump right in and welcome Cristina Frank from WMTW. Thank you for freeing up so much time in your schedule, Cristina.
Stacey, thank you for having me. This is so cool. We're like flipping the tables for such a great celebration.
Well, we should say this is to mark 500 episodes of Diabetes Connections. I'll talk a little bit here and then I'll get out of your way. I wanted to do something different. I do not always enjoy being the one being interviewed, but I thought it would be fun. And many of you are very familiar with Cristina. In addition to hosting the morning show and doing such a great job, she lives with type 1. She's been a guest on the podcast. And Cristina, if you don't mind, I do need to say, because this is live and people can see me, which is unusual, I'm not in my home studio. I'm visiting my parents. I'm in my dad's office. So the lighting and this is just a mess, but we're going to have a good time.
I think you look fabulous. It looks great.
It
looks great.
And as you're watching, you can post comments. You can post questions for us. And this will be replayed as a podcast episode in just a couple of days. All right, that's it. I'm done with the hosting duties, Cristina.
Okay.
Take it away.
So Stacey, 500 episodes. Congratulations. That is amazing. Can you believe that you've hit 500? And how many hours of talking and podcasting is that?
It's so strange to think about because when I started the show in the summer of 2015, I wasn't thinking about getting to any specific number. I wasn't thinking, oh, this would make a great 50 episode run, or maybe we'll make it to 75. I just thought, let's see what happens. And this is what happened. It's been fantastic.
It's incredible. I mean, to hit 100 is a feat, but 500, you've done that time and time and time and time again. So looking back at all those 500 episodes, can you kind of give us a list of what are your top 3?
It's tough, obviously, because they're all my babies. But I think my favorite types of episodes, and I won't chicken out, I will give you a good answer to that one. But my favorite types of episodes are where I can talk to the technology companies and do more of a deep dive into what people with diabetes want to know about the technology that you live with, right, day to day. So when I can talk to Tandem or Omnipod or Dexcom or Medtronic and say, okay, so you've come out with this new pump, or you've come out with this new sensor, or there's a new phone thing, or there's a new hybrid closed loop. What does that mean? And how does it work? And what is the sleep function? And what is the exercise? And what does a different range mean? These kinds of questions that when we see diabetes technology companies on CNBC or something, they're not going to talk about. They're going to talk about their stock prices and their, what's coming out in the future and their number of users. But I like to be able to answer the questions that my listeners send in and try to get down to the nitty gritty as much as possible. So I would say my favorite types of episodes are those. Some of my real favorite individual ones, I think my all-time favorite was when I interviewed my family back in 2016. And that was for Benny's 10-year diversary. My son was diagnosed in 2006. And 10 years later, I interviewed individually my husband, my daughter, and Benny. And it was a little bit of a free-for-all, especially with Benny as a 10-year-old. He was
trying to corral him.
a 12-year-old. Yeah, I'm trying to think how old he was. Yeah, he was not yet 12.
Wow.
And it was kind of bananas, but it was really fun. And it was the first time that we ever really sat down and talked about it in a public-facing way. So I loved that episode. It's not like the best broadcast, as you know, as a professional, as a news anchor. It's a little bit all over the place. But sentimentally, I like it as a time capsule. It really captured that. There's another episode that I did in around the same time period when I interviewed Victor Garber, who lives with type 1. And I love talking to him. I've only done the one interview. I've talked to him since, but not for the podcast. He's just very open. He was diagnosed at such a different time. He has all these great showbiz stories. And I don't really get nervous talking to people anymore, not just because of the podcast, but I worked in broadcasting for 20 years. And as you know, you're talking to all sorts of different people, especially when you do a morning show. One day it could be like a chef, and then it's a politician, and then it's a teacher, and then it's it's all sorts of people. But I was really nervous talking to Victor Garber. And I think if you go back and listen to that episode, you can hear me talking at like a mile a minute. It's like, ah!
I now want to go back and listen to it because I remember that episode. Now I'm going to try to kind of see if I can hear it. Okay, so then to flip the script, what are your kind of least 3 favorite?
Well, I'm going to put this one. This is a good and a bad one. So I really find that listeners, maybe it's a certain section of listeners, but they really like it when I interview Benny. Those are very popular episodes, and I will be talking to him in a couple of weeks because he's just about to come home from 8 weeks away at camp. I get very nervous for those episodes because he and I, obviously as a mom and as a kid, we have very different perceptions of what we want to share about diabetes. I mean, everybody knows that we're far from perfect, right? Nobody's perfect with diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
But Benny is more than happy to share a lot of disaster stuff and his priorities are different from mine. Let's just say that. Those are the episodes that I think I like, but I also dread recording because I'm never sure. I don't want to edit him, right? I don't want to edit him out, but I'm always worried, like, what is he going to say? Is he going to make me look really bad? The other ones I don't like are, and I do this sometimes and I do disclose, but sometimes you have an opportunity to talk to a celebrity or someone who, is on TV or a sitcom person, and they've partnered with a medical company. I get probably every day, I get emails from companies, and they're not all diabetes focused, which is odd, but I get them, we've partnered with Shirley Temple, and she's going to tell you about her new line of amazing drinks that will lower your A1C 4 points, right? I mean, it's that kind of thing. And I'm sure you get them too in your newsroom. And every once in a while, I think my listeners are going to want to hear from this person. This is a good opportunity. I should do this. And I always regret it. Because the person generally is not, and sometimes they send you, I'm not going to talk about this, I'm not going to talk about that. They're not willing to really open up. They just want to get on and say, here are my 5 lines about the product. Then you ask them another question. Well, here are some more lines about the product. So those are the episodes where I'm like, meh. And I also never crazy about talking to the insulin companies because we always want to talk about pricing. And they always send us a poor PR person who we don't know what this person really thinks. They don't have any power in the company and they just give us the company line. So I try to do those because, you want to get the information out there. I'm sure we'll be talking to Lilly soon about their discontinuation of the glucagon kits, right? But will we get a real answer? So those are frustrating. They're necessary, but they're frustrating, I guess.
So it seems like definitely with the last 2, it's like that authenticity. Because you can tell from your podcast, that's what you're going for. And if you're not going to kind of be here, a genuine answer, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's a waste of time, but sometimes you feel like you're going to get something out of it.
Yeah. Especially when you're racking up near 500 now plus, right? What is the most surprising thing that you've learned over these 500 episodes?
Oh my gosh. It's funny. Sometimes I do an episode and I think this one's going to really hit. People are going to love this. And, it doesn't really happen. But the most surprising thing, I guess I would say, And it goes to the authenticity. You could hear it in the beginning too, that podcasting is not like broadcasting. I came to podcasting from radio, and there are things that you do in radio. And it's funny to think about now because I haven't worked in radio in 10 years, but there's a lot of things you do in radio that you do not do in podcasting. For example, you and I sitting here, I don't have to what we call reset the interview, right? My guest this week is Cristina Frank from WMTW. If you're listening to a radio show, they're going to reset the guest every 10 minutes, if not more. They're going to say the name of the show 5,000 times. They're going to say the call letters 1,000,000 times because the thinking was you were turning this is so old fashioned. You were turning the dial around in the car and trying to find what you were listening to. So you might not remember what you're listening to with a podcast. You're there. The other thing that was surprising, I was told at the beginning when I started the show that it had to be a certain length. Podcasts had to be 25 to 30 minutes because that was the length of time of a commute. That's not true at all. And I try not to make my episodes too long, but I feel like it's only because we've kind of come to a rhythm of what everybody expects. So I don't think people really like big surprises. So if the podcast episode is only, if it's my in the news episodes are only 5 to 7 minutes long, but if it was one of these type and it was 7 minutes, you'd say, where's the interview? What happened? Right. And if I did an in the news that was 45 minutes, you'd be falling asleep. So it's that kind of thing.
And going with it, when you added the in the news segment, looking now for 500 plus, do you have any ideas? Are you going to expand even further? Is there a kind of third edition coming?
You're trying to kill me. It's been interesting. Again, if you listen, and I have a lot of longtime listeners, we've tried a lot of different things. And that's another nice thing about podcasting is you can try stuff and kind of see what sticks. Several years ago, I did a segment where I went to conferences and I would talk to every single vendor who was there and ask them, hey, you've got 5 minutes. What's your product? Who are you? Who is it for? And I edited those down and I think I called it shop talk. I can't even remember. Total dud. I did that, I think, for about 15 episodes because I had all the interviews and no feedback, no listener spikes. Nobody cared. It was bleh. So we didn't do that. I've tried some additional segments in the show, but most people say that they really just like the interview. That's what they want for those episodes. I have a lot of ideas, but I have limited time, right? I mean, it's like, how much can you do? So we're experimenting. I like my game shows, but I have to keep those. Those take a lot of work, so I try to keep those to once or twice a year.
Okay, and so now I'm asking you to pull back the curtain of Oz. Tell us behind the scenes, how do you put a podcast together from when you start, when you find someone who you want to interview or the topic that you want to talk about all the way until the episode is released to us?
Wow. So it is, I should say, it's all me. It is a staff of one. I do have my editor, John Buchanan, who's wonderful, but he literally edits the episode together. I sent him all the pieces. So I get an idea. Let's say it's coming from me, not an email, right? Someone doesn't say, hey, I'd really like to be on the show. I pitch them. I'm doing this every couple of weeks. Hey, I'd really like to come on the show. This would make a great podcast. I explain who I am. They say yes. I send them my scheduling link. They pick a date and time. And then I use a variety of ways to record because it depends on the person. I try to keep it to a service I like called Zencastr, which I think has better audio quality than Zoom. I'm not a big fan of Zoom, even though I don't understand still how Zoom won over Skype during the pandemic. I mean, I was a big fan of Skype. It lost, right? We're using StreamYard, which I use to go live to different social media platforms, but I don't really like for recording. Zencastr gives me different audio tracks, which makes it a lot easier to edit. So then I try to do research, figure out what I'm going to ask, send the person all my information for guests, which tells them you don't need a professional microphone, but here's what you do need. Please test your stuff out, blah, blah, blah. Here's the legal documentation to sign, letting you do the release. Send me a photo so I can use that. And then we do the interview. I then immediately turn that around and transcribe it. I don't transcribe it myself, but I send it. I use Otter, which is another great service. And I do that because I have found that having a transcription makes editing much easier. I edit a little bit for length. I don't generally edit the interviews heavily, but I will go through and kind of see. I joke that I edit myself the most. So, I go through because I'll say, what do I want to ask next sometimes? Or I take things like that out. Or if my dog starts barking or crazy things happen. So I take that out. Then I do my podcast a little differently. Once the interview's done, that might sit for a couple of weeks, depending on what else is going on. Then I go and I do the intro and the outro separately. So I'll write that, and that's the big guest introduction. That's where I do the ads. If there are ads in that episode, I do all that. And then I send the whole thing to my editor. And then he tells me, stop. He always says, stop cleaning for the cleaning lady. Because he thinks because I do go through and I kind of edit a little bit because I know how to do audio editing. And he's always telling me to stop. Then the real work begins because then I get the episode back and I have to load it on my website. I have to load it on my podcast host. I do graphics for each episode. I do show notes for each. This is a lot of work. I do show notes for each episode.
That's a lot. I'm tired just hearing. That's a lot of work for you to do.
I do a newsletter once a week. So I write that. And then I put social media posts and I schedule the whole thing.
How far ahead do you have to kind of work once you release an episode? Are you a couple weeks ahead before we listen to it?
Yeah, it really does depend. I don't like to be very far ahead. I try to tape and release within 4 to 6 weeks at the most. Quite often, I turn it around much sooner than that, especially if it's one of these technology episodes. Some episodes, every once in a while, I'll talk to someone who just did an episode with Jeff Ryan, who was diagnosed in 1971. And he also has an essential tremor. He's got a lot going on. But we talked, I want to say back in March. And that was one that just kept getting moved around because I knew I could play it at almost any time. But there were technology and FDA approvals and things that kind of kept getting in the way. So that one sat. But I just taped the introduction, my new part for that. I usually do that no more than a week before.
Wow.
So the episode the episode you're hearing on Tuesdays is usually sent to John on Thursdays of the week before. I don't like to work too far ahead because things can change. I mean, podcasting is terrible for breaking news if you don't do a daily podcast, but I don't like it to be too far behind so that it sounds outdated. So yeah, I have about 4 or 5 that are kind of sitting in the can, the interviews, but I'll release them a few days after I tape the introduction and kind of reset the table in case anything's changed.
And when it comes to your podcast, of course, with sponsorships, that's what makes it all happen. How do you make sure, as we were talking about that authenticity, how do you make sure those sponsors really match up with what you believe in?
Well, I think it's pretty easy because I had a lot of experience with that when I worked in news talk radio. That was how, if you listen to news talk, if you listen to AM radio, I don't know, but if you listen to news talk, you have a lot of the hosts doing what are called live reads. They read commercials, right? This my buddy at the used car lot down the street or whatever. And I had a lot of experience kind of figuring out how to thread the needle of saying no, right? I don't want to do that one. And I had a whole bunch of rules. By the time I left there, I worked there for 10 years. I had a whole bunch of rules. And the biggest one was I will never endorse anything or take anything for free that I can't physically remove from my house myself with my 2 hands. So no HVAC, no gutters, no, they always wanted to do. And then the company might go out of business and then you're stuck with something that can't be serviced. So I learned. With Diabetes Connections, it's pretty easy because I try to have sponsors that are people that my listeners care about, right? And that would appeal to my listeners, that we have a personal relationship with and that we believe in. And it can be very difficult because not to find them and to endorse them, but just a little bit more behind the scenes. These are medical companies for the most part. I'm always really excited when I have a non-medical sponsor. No offense to my fabulous medical sponsors, only because it's easier, right? Because there are so many rules and regulations about what we can and cannot say. And I stick to those. And if you listen to enough podcasts, you'll hear people really not sticking to that. And people have gotten in trouble. Brands have gotten in trouble. A few brands have been scared away from podcasting because of that, which is unfortunate. But we're limited. And I try to make it listenable and interesting and authentic. But I think it's pretty clear and I'm pretty open about when the commercial is, when the commercial is not, and exactly what they're getting, because nobody gets to tell me what to talk about during the show. Nobody gets to say these other people can't come on, nothing like that.
And you do make it very transparent that, say, if you have an episode with one of your sponsors, or if they're involved, that you do say, this is a sponsor, but they don't tell me what to say. So I think you do make that transparent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the ways it works is Omnipod is a sponsor this year. And that's been really interesting because, everybody knows Benny uses a T-Slim pump, but I really think choice in pump systems is super important. They obviously have a new product that's out, but just in terms of behind the scene, how it works, I did a panel discussion that hasn't aired yet at a conference. And I had 3 people who use Omnipod 5 and nobody from Omnipod was in the room. Nobody from Insulet was there telling us what to say or what to talk about. We just said, we went around the table and they answered a whole bunch of questions. And when that episode airs, I'm going to have someone from Insulet talk about the product because questions came up. It'll be fun. It'll be like, here's the questions that came up. Here's what the lay people said about it. What should they know? to me, that's a really great use of a sponsorship where it just gives me access to the nice person who can come on and explain the stuff, but they're not telling me what to ask or what to say, because that doesn't fly. That's not worth doing. That's a different kind of podcast. I mean, those are out there, right? When you have people paying to come on your show, those are there. And, I've been asked if I would do that, and I don't want to.
But like you said, just to even have that access to get the questions answered right away.
Yeah.
Is helpful. And I'm looking forward to that episode because I am on the Omnipod 5. So I saw in the group that you posted that one was coming up. So I can't wait for that one to be released.
There's so much good stuff out right now.
So in the middle of this 500 episodes, we had, a global pandemic that hit. How did that change your podcast? Did it make it easier because more people became comfortable with, Skype and Zoom? Or did it make it more challenging?
It was both. It made it much more challenging because, especially for most of 2020, podcast listenership went way down because podcasting is not a communal activity. Everybody's not sitting around in the household listening to podcasts together. And you had people who were commuting and people who were listening, maybe they walked their kids to the bus stop and then came home, took a walk around the block, listened to podcasts. Everybody was home. So in the first part of the pandemic, podcast listenership went way, way down because it just wasn't something people did together and they were suddenly all together. But it did give me the opportunity to reach more guests because, as you said, everybody was home and everybody learned how to use this kind of stuff. Right. Lots of people went out and even bought microphones, but everybody became familiar with it. And I think we tried some new things. We tried, I reached out to listeners and tried to get them to kind of tell me what was going on in their lives, have different ways to reach people. We did a couple of Zoom meetups. It was a really interesting time. I mean, for me, I've been working at home by myself since 2015. So my family was home, which was different, but my day-to-day life was, obviously it changed for everybody, but my work life wasn't that different.
You could have had a live studio audience if your whole family just wanted to come join you there in the studio.
My kids, they're like, oh, mom with a radio voice again. Oh, the podcast. So lame. I was so funny with my kids. I said, should I get on TikTok? Everybody says get on TikTok because there's more exposure. They were like, do not get on TikTok.
They're the ones saying don't.
Right, don't do it. Don't do it. You are not made for TikTok.
Well, 500 episodes in, your audience has really grown. Kind of, what do you want listeners to know about their support over the years?
Oh my gosh, I'm blown away. The listener support is fantastic. It's interesting because this isn't a show. Obviously, I'm a parent of a child with type 1. We've done a bunch of surveys. We know the audience pretty well. There are a lot of parents who listen, but my main audience is adults with type 1 who are there for the news, who are there for the technology episodes, who are there for the research. And I hesitate sometimes. I get a lot of questions like that. People would like me to share more about what worked. I will say, going back to one of my favorite episodes, I did one about sleepovers a while ago, like what worked for us. And that has become a very popular episode because parents find it. And that's something that everybody has questions about. But I'm hesitant to do more of those episodes because I know I share a lot about Benny, especially in my books, but I am concerned about his privacy. I also don't think that as a layperson, I can give advice, but I can't give like dosing advice. I can't, it's like, I'm not comfortable with that. So the audience that I have has kind of gotten to a point where it's not, I'm doing this. The audience has actually grown. The last year of the podcast has been incredible. We've had great numbers. And thank you all so much for that. I think it's grown 25% in the last, 6 to 8 months, which is very cool. But it is almost a self-selecting audience. I get in trouble when I say this, but I think it is the smartest Facebook group with diabetes. They are just incredible. They're smart. They're supportive. Yes, you CGM in the cloud people. We know you're data people. You're very, very smart. But I have like the nicest, most welcoming, respectful Facebook group. And I think part of that is because people are asking questions that are thoughtful and a little bit provocative, but are also about the technology and the research. There are so many places on the internet to ask, how do I get my Dexcom to stick? Or how do I, which pump should I use? Or things like that, that we don't really have too many of those discussions, which keeps us smaller as a Facebook group. But I'm fine with that. I'm not the best at self-promotion. I'm not the best at bringing everybody in. Well, that's a lie. I'm very good at self-promotion for the podcast.
You're so good at it.
But for the Facebook stuff, I don't want a Facebook group of a bajillion people just yelling at each other. I run 2 Facebook groups and I am incredibly strict. People get kicked out all the time. All the time.
It's cutthroat. It's cutthroat once you're in there.
I don't tolerate nonsense. Be respectful. So yeah, I would say to my listeners, thank you all. There's no show without you. And thank you for your opinions. Thank you for your feedback. I don't live with diabetes, right? And I can't model the show after Benny's stuff all the time. So what you want to hear, letting me know that makes a huge difference. And one of my favorite things to do is when I have like a CEO on of these technology companies, I always say, what do you want to know? And they always give me a list of questions. And how fun to be able to say, hey, one of my listeners noticed that the adhesive changed in 2017 and changed again in 2019, or they noticed that this sensor number doesn't seem to work. And have you looked into that? And every once in a while you get an answer like, oh, yes, that's true, or no, or what, it's fun. It's interesting to be able to let them know that people are interested and are paying attention. Because I think some of them are very good at remembering that, but I think sometimes I'll say it. I think sometimes they forget that they serve people, right? Most of these companies do serve stockholders, and most of the people who work at these companies are in it to make a better product and make people's lives easier. But I think there is huge value in being able to say to a CTO or CEO, these individuals who use your product exist and are passionate and have questions and would like some accountability. And what a privilege to be able to be the person to do that and to say that. That's what I get out of the show more than anything.
I like the moments when you talk to CEOs and you mention an issue, and if they don't have an answer, they will say, I'll write it down and I'll get back to you next time, which maybe that prioritizes it right to the top of the list, and maybe it can help solve that problem even faster.
Yeah. We may not get credit, but along the way, we know, that they hear the complaints and they want to make things better and they change things here and there. So absolutely.
I have to say with your podcast saying that, the people who the listeners, the kind of the most are adults with type 1. My husband, when we were dating, he started listening to your podcast to learn more about type 1. So you were almost like the type 1 diabetes boot camp with different topics. So you were integral. You were part of our relationship.
Oh my God, that's so great. How exciting.
So 5 episodes in, it's almost like you've done a very elaborate thesis on type 1 diabetes, from the people who have it to the different stages of life, people are living with it, the research. What would you say from 2015 and in these 500 episodes, what are the trends that you have noticed?
I think the number one trend from where I have sat is the DIY movement being incredibly integral to changing the commercial offerings from these companies. If you look back at blog posts and the community in 2012, 2013, 2014, right before I started, there was a real adversarial relationship between the Night Scout people, CGM in the cloud, OpenAPS. It's hard to talk about that. If you're not familiar, I would urge you to either listen to the episodes or just search the hashtag We Are Not Waiting. There's wonderful stuff out there, not just with my podcast, but tons of information. But these are the folks who basically decided that they would not wait to have better diabetes technology and figured out ways to make it better in a homemade way, a DIY way. What it showed was that there was a market for it. It was safe and it was very effective. And it pushed the commercialization of everything we're using now. I think that if those folks hadn't come along and done what they had, I think that we would still be years behind. I don't think that everything from Control IQ, Omnipod 5, even the Medtronic, even the 670, which was several years old, I don't think that would have come out as quickly as it did. I think we would have had a few more years of the share cradle for Dexcom and things like that. And a lot of the folks who worked in that, I almost said field, but a lot of the DIY folks now work for these companies. And, as I said, we were talking to CEOs and making your voices heard. What a better thing for the diabetes community than to have these incredibly passionate, brilliant people working at these companies now and making all of our voices heard. So that I think is incredible. And I also think, and this is kind of corny, but I do think that having the community, and the community is a huge thing, right? It's not just a certain type of person. It's not just a certain group of people, but diabetes is such a different condition than so many others. And having a community and finding your little pocket of that community makes all of the difference. I got an email, and I mentioned Jeff Ryan. That was the most recent episode. I got an email yesterday, and there's a guy, he said, I'm not on social media. I don't know where to go, but Jeff's story spoke to me. I have so much in common with him. Where can you point me? And so I'm going to try to figure out, if you're not on social media, it's a little difficult, but I'm going to see, will Jeff take an email from this guy? I'm sure he will. And that happens all the time. I got an email last week from a mom. She had contacted me after the episode where Benny went to Israel last summer. And when he came home, we did an episode, and her son was going to Israel. They were going with him, which I didn't get to do. But he was playing in the sporting games. So he was away from them for 3 weeks. They were in the country, but they were not together. And she emailed me and said, it was such a big help. We figured out what questions to ask. And that's all community stuff. And I think hearing the voices, knowing you're not alone, like I said, it sounds kind of corny, but that stuff always helps. It always helps. And we always learn about what can make life just a little bit better with type 1. I'm sure not necessarily from the podcast, but I'm sure you've learned stuff that you use every day from other people in diabetes and you've passed it back. I mean, just by years ago, you shared that didn't your Dexcom go off while you were on the set or something?
Yes, while I was on air and I almost threw my phone across the studio. But yeah, it's like people who are kind of in the trenches with you and the people who are using these devices day in, day out, and you're seeing different temperatures and stresses and different just daily parts of living life. And they're finding ways to finding hacks. It's that's how we all learn about it. Social media and having this community has been huge.
Yeah. I will also say, and this is kind of a vanity thing, I don't know that this would ever happen, but kind of in my head, and I'm trying to post transcriptions of every episode now, which is slow work, because I get a transcript, but it doesn't make any sense. If you saw the transcript I get, my software does not speak diabetes. So I kind of go through, and it's a very slow process, but I'm doing it. I feel like whenever I end the podcast, it'll be like a snapshot of a moment in time of diabetes history, right? And in 50 years from now, if somebody wanted to say like, wow, were they really having a separate CGM and pump? Like, how did that work? Or things, what were the questions that people had as this new technology was emerging? It might sound a little silly, but I'm hoping that the podcast could be a source for somebody else down the road.
I like it. It's almost like that Today Show clip where you have them saying back in the late 90s, what is the internet?
Right.
What is this? So hopefully our talk about CGMs, in 20 years, that'll be that version of it.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about it. I have episodes from, I'm sure if you go back from 2015, 16, and 17, we're saying, what is a hybrid closed loop?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, even just the episodes from 2020, when is Omnipod 5 coming?
Yeah,
right?
when? So looking ahead to the future with all the experts and everyone who you have talked with over the 500th episode, I've had type 1 diabetes for 26 years now. I remember in 1996, I was told a cure is coming within 10 years. In your honest opinion, what do you think about a cure in this lifetime?
It's such a tough question. And I do think it depends on your experiences. We were actually really fortunate to be told a cure was not 5 years away when my son was diagnosed, but our endocrinologist said, I'm hearing about this thing called an artificial pancreas. When he was talking about, hybrid closed loop systems and automated insulin delivery systems, he said, it's like 3 to 5 years away, which is so funny because it's always 5 years. And of course it was 15, but it's here. I'm not super optimistic about an actual easy cure for type 1 because I don't see any science that shows any autoimmune condition is imminently curable. And I think we have to be careful about forgetting that type 1 is autoimmune. It's a specific type of condition. I'm really excited about functional cures, about things like stem cell research and encapsulation and the CRISPR technology that could be used for gene editing. Of course, when you start thinking less theoretical and saying, okay, so if we can get that and we can cure people, how the heck do we get access to surgery for all those people who need it? People can't afford CGMs. People can afford insulin. How are we going to send everybody with type 1 to the emergency, to a surgical suite?
It comes with a price.
That would be very difficult, but I'm very hopeful for that kind of thing. I think gene editing is going to be absolutely incredible. Like I said, the CRISPR technology. And I think things like smart insulin could make a big difference. I mean, that was bought up, I want to say, by Lilly. We'd have to check the source on that, but that's been in development for a long time. And now is it shelved? That's kind of scary. But things like that, where you would take one injection a week and not have to do anything else. I think my son would feel like maybe that's not a cure, but that's a treatment that he could really enjoy. So no, I'm not super hopeful for a cure. Sorry, but I am hopeful for much better treatments. I like anything that helps people with diabetes think less. Just think less. Because you think, even if you think you're not thinking all day long, you're thinking all day long. And that's tough. I think that's very difficult. So that's, I would like to see. And I don't want to sound pessimistic because I'm not. Benny's life is much better than I had feared when he was 2. And we've gone from 8 to 10 injections a day to really wonderful technology. And I would like to just see that technology get better. And I'd like to see him have to use it less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I say amen to that. Yes, very much. So for the next 500 episodes, when we come back here in about 5 years, what do you see for the future of Diabetes Connections and this community?
Yeah, it's interesting, Cristina, because my role in the diabetes community is about to really change. Benny is a senior in high school this year. He'll be 18 pretty soon. And in the last couple of years, I've really pulled back how much I manage or even help him manage. He's fairly almost 100% independent at this point. I've got to get him to do the insurance stuff. That I still do for him, but that's I think
tough.
He can wait. He can wait. Yeah. And I say that again, saying that I don't plan the show around our life with diabetes, but I've also seen a lot of parents in my position who kind of distance from the diabetes community when their child goes off to college because it's not my life, right? And I started the show kind of selfishly to learn more, right? I wanted to know everything I could about diabetes for Benny, and I wanted to hear more about news and technology. So I'm not saying that I'm stopping the show anytime soon. I'm certainly not planning on it, but I can't give you an answer because I don't really know. I don't know what the next couple of years with diabetes are going to be like. I've always thought about doing a different podcast of something completely different, a different topic, or I don't have anything planned, but that's always in the back of my mind. So I think the most likely thing is I do continue for a while. I love the news stuff, the in the news. That was always my career. Doing the in the news has been so much fun because nobody else is doing anything like that anywhere. Mainstream media, podcasting, whatever. So that's definitely going to keep going. And I like the idea of having a place to ask these CEOs these questions. But I think I'm going to give myself the out of, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much diabetes stuff is really going to be in the future for me. So we'll see.
I don't think it's an out. It's more of just saying, hey, the future's open. Like, why not just say it's one thing? I think that's a great answer.
Thank you. It's a weird time of life. I mean, you're a mom of a very young child, right? You've got a toddler.
She'll be 3 in September.
And my kids are heading out. It's pretty wild. So I'm leaving the door open. That's a good way to say it. I'm leaving the door open.
That is a good answer. Last question.
Okay.
This is going to put you incredibly in the hot seat. Do you know how many hours in 500 episodes? What does that add up to? That must be a bunch.
That's a really good question. If I can figure out an answer, I will get back to you on that.
I was like, if you could really quickly, that'd be very fast.
Yeah. Well, you think about it. I mean, the show prep, the show post that I mentioned, the social media, the writing of the newsletter, the doing all the graphics and the loading, that takes me about an hour and a half for each episode. So that's after the episode's done.
Wow.
So let's say every episode takes 4 to 5 hours. The in the news episodes are a little shorter because there's no other guest involved. So that's as fast as I can find the news, write it, and voice it. So, it's pretty wild to think about. I'm terrible at math, but you've got 2,500 maybe?
That's a lot.
Don't you think? I don't know.
That's a lot of time. I'm like, I could use my calculator if you want me to. I went to journalism because I don't love math.
Don't love math. But I really do. I've been very fortunate, I should say. I do treat it as a full-time job. I say I work 25 to 30 hours a week on it. It's probably a little bit more, but I love being able to do that. And I feel really fortunate that I'm able to say it because most people who podcast like this, kind of do it on the side or do it after work. So to be able to really focus on it has been really a real privilege for me to be able to do that.
And I say as one of your very loyal listeners, all the work you put in it and all the episodes. So keep them coming. I wish I could give you like a cake because it's such an accomplishment.
Oh.
500 congratulations, Stacey.
Thank you so much.
It is quite a feat and such an incredible milestone to hit.
Thank you. I'm just laughing, Cristina, because I'm so thrilled to do this, but you can tell after all these years in audio, look at this. I got this crazy light. It's just a mess up here.
You're making it work. That's the most important thing.
We always make it work.
That's
we always make it work. Well, thank you so much for jumping in and being the host of this episode. I really appreciate it.
I'm honored that you asked me to. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And anytime I can chat with you, I'll do it any day.
All right. Well, we won't wait 500 more episodes. We'll have you on the show again soon. All right.
That's a deal.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, Stacey.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.